Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today it's time for Rank in Blood. I'm going to be ranking the studio albums of Slayer from worst to best. Kicking off the list here with number 12, I'm going to go with Undisputed Attitude from 1996, and this was an album that I didn't want to include in the first place on this countdown because it consists mostly of hardcore punk covers. There's only one original track on here, Gemini, which is written by Tom Araya, that was written for this album, so that's why I'm including it, kind of with an asterisk, because there's only one original track on here. A majority of it, like I said, consists of hardcore punk covers from bands such as Minor Threat, Verbal Abuse, and The Stooges, just to name a few. And all in all, while I am a hardcore punk fan and I do enjoy a majority of these bands, you know, this album really doesn't do much for me. I'm not a big fan of Slayer covering hardcore punk, and even though it's fun, it's just not a Slayer album that I gravitate towards all that much, so it is coming in at number 12 here, my least favorite release by Slayer, and an album that I wasn't really sure whether or not I was going to include on this countdown in the first place, Undisputed Attitude from 1996. My pick for number 11 here on the list, Divine Intervention, was released in 1994 amidst the grunge and alternative trend that had dominated the music industry, so Slayer were already at a disadvantage here, but it's very commendable that the band stayed true to their sound here and didn't try to sound like Alice in Chains or Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, but rather stayed true to the Slayer sound, and if anything, doubled down on the heaviness on this record. And, you know, it's one of my least favorite Slayer albums, but it's not bad by any means, and there are some standout tracks on here for me, such as Killing Fields, Fictional Reality, the title track Divine Intervention, and Circle of Beliefs. So, some really strong tracks on here. All in all, like I said, it's one of my least favorite Slayer records. I find it to be a bit lackluster at times, but not bad by any means. Coming in at number 11 here on the list, I'm going to go with 1994's Divine Intervention. Moving on now into the top 10, I'm going to go with Diabolus In Musica from 1998. This is deemed as Slayer's most experimental album, and you can definitely hear influences on here of groove metal as well as nu metal, which I actually think is kind of cool. You know, I really enjoy it when bands tend to expand upon their sound and broaden their horizons, challenge their audience with something a little bit more experimental, so I think that this is a really interesting album for Slayer. Not bad by any means, in my opinion. You know, I know a lot of people would probably have it as their least favorite Slayer record, and while it's not top shelf Slayer, it's definitely a very solid and enjoyable album that I think definitely is different from other Slayer releases in a good way, and it definitely causes me to gravitate towards this album a little bit more. You know, majority of the material on here was written by Jeff Hanneman, and for standout tracks on this record, I gotta go with Bitter Peace, Stain of Mind, Overt Enemy, Perversions of Pain, Scream from the Sky, and Wicked. So some really strong tracks on here, in my opinion, and all in all, like I said, not top shelf Slayer, but not bad by any means either, so I know it gets a lot of hate from a lot of people, but for me personally, I enjoy it. It kicks us off here in the top 10, so coming in at number 10, I'm going to go with 1998's Diabolus In Musica. Following that up at number 9 here on the list, I'm going to go with World Painted Blood from 2009, and this would be the final Slayer album to feature the full original lineup. 4 years after this album's release, Jeff Hanneman would pass away, and Dave Lombardo would depart from the group, both in the same year, so I think the original band goes out here with a really strong, heavy, thrashy record, with some standout tracks being the title track, World Painted Blood. Also, some other standouts for me include Hate Worldwide, Beauty Through Order, Human Strain, and American as well. So some really strong, heavy, thrashy tracks on this album, in my opinion, and a great last release here by the original lineup. Coming in at number 9 on the list, I'm going to go with World Painted Blood from 2009. Coming in at number 8, I'm going to go with the most recent and final Slayer studio album before their retirement. From 2015, I'm going to go with Repentless. And this album was released after the departure of Dave Lombardo and the passing of Jeff Hanneman here. So, personnel on this record, of course, you have Tom Araya and Kerry King, but also, replacing Jeff Hanneman, you have Gary Holt from Exodus and Paul Bostaph reassuming his position here as the drummer for Slayer, replacing Dave Lombardo once again. Funny how history repeats itself, but the final Slayer record here, and it's a total bombardment of an album here from Slayer. Classic elements of Slayer throughout, a really thrashy, heavy record, and a perfect farewell for the band. Some standouts for me here include the title track, Repentless, Take Control, Vices, Chasing Death, When the Stillness Comes, and Piano Wire. Some really strong tracks on here, in my opinion, and some total thrash metal classics on here, in my opinion, as well. Some great work by Slayer on their last release. Definitely one of the best modern-day thrash metal records. Just great stuff from beginning to end. And like I described it before, a total bombardment of an album here by Slayer. Their final release, and a fine way to go out, in my opinion, for 2015. I'm going to go with Repentless, coming in at number 8 here on the list. Next, at number 7, I'm going to go with Christ Illusion from 2006. It's the first Slayer record released with Dave Lombardo on the drums in 16 years. The last time was in 1990 on Seasons in the Abyss, so Dave Lombardo rejoining the band here in the studio for this record, which, in my opinion, features some of Slayer's most poignant lyrics, and some awesome standout tracks on here being Fleshstorm, Catalyst, Eyes of the Insane, and Cult, just to name a few. Great album and really consistent throughout with that classic Slayer sound. Can't ask for anything more from Slayer. Coming in at number 7 here, I'm going to go with Christ Illusion from 2006. For number 6, I'm going to go with God Hates Us All from 2001. And here's an album that I think is pretty underrated in the Slayer catalog, and a record that really doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion. It's an album that many people consider to be a cross between nu metal and thrash metal, but in my opinion, it's much more thrashy than it is nu metal. And an album here that would feature Paul Bostaph on the drums for the final time until Repentless of 2015. Of course, after this album's recording, Paul Bostaph would sustain a chronic elbow injury, and the next album released by Slayer would feature the return of Dave Lombardo. But I think Paul Bostaph is on fire on this record. Some great drumming throughout, and for some standout tracks on here, I'm going to go with Disciple, New Faith, Cast Down, Threshold, Bloodline, as well as Awesome, Warzone, Here Comes the Pain, and Payback to close things out. It's a great album, in my opinion, and like I said, it's pretty underrated in the Slayer catalog. Coming in at number 6, I'm going to go with God Hates Us All from 2001. Breaking into the top 5 now, I'm going to go with their debut album from 1983, Show No Mercy, and, you know, a lot of the thrash metal debuts around this time all sound similar, but Slayer delivered here with a total thrash metal essential. One of the best thrash debut albums of all time, in my opinion, is Show No Mercy, a great album that definitely helped to define the thrash genre in its early stages, with some great tracks on here like Evil Has No Boundaries, Die by the Sword, Metal Storm, Face the Slayer. It's great. Let's see, what else is on here? The Final Command, Show No Mercy, the title track, Tormentor. This is a fantastic thrashy debut album here from beginning to end, and definitely, like I said, one of the best thrash metal debuts of all time. Coming in at number 5 here, kicking us off in the top 5, I'm going to go with their debut record from 1983, Show No Mercy. Slayer would follow up Show No Mercy with a killer sophomore record. My number 4 here on the list is Hell Awaits from 1985. Produced by Slayer and Brian Slagel, it shows definite advances from their debut album here, which is great. You know, it's fantastic to hear a band maturing in their sound more and more and becoming more comfortable with their sound as well. That's exactly what this album presents to me. I think it's a great record here with some fantastic tracks, being Hell Awaits, the title track, At Dawn They Sleep, which is just one of the best thrash metal songs of all time, in my opinion. Some more great tracks include Crypts of Eternity and Hardening of the Arteries to close things out. It's definitely one of the best thrash metal sophomore records, and it's my number 4 here on the list. I'm going to go with their sophomore album from 1985, Hell Awaits. Top 3 now, and for my number 3, I'm going to go with Seasons in the Abyss from 1990. And, you know, what's really interesting to me about this album is how it was influenced by the previous 2 Slayer albums, that, of course, being South of Heaven and Rain and Blood, because on this album here, you get a cross between faster-paced, thrashy material, like seen on Rain and Blood, and slower material as well, that's still heavy, but just slower tempoed, like seen on South of Heaven. So, really cool and interesting that they are able to combine the 2 influences here from their 2 previous records onto this album, which definitely shows diversity from a songwriting perspective, which I think is really, really cool on here. And when it comes to standout tracks, this whole album is just filled with banger after banger. An incredible record with some standout tracks being War Ensemble, one of the best album openers in the Slayer catalog, Blood Red, Spirit in Black, Dead Skin Mask is just fantastic, Skeletons of Society, Temptation, and then, of course, the title track, Seasons in the Abyss. Between War Ensemble and the title track, this album received its heaviest play on MTV to date, which is really cool as well. A great record here from beginning to end, and it would be the final with Dave Lombardo on the drums until Christ Illusion from 2006. So a great record here for Dave Lombardo to go out on for over a decade, and all in all, one of the best in the Slayer catalog. Definitely worthy of cracking the top 3, so coming in at number 3 here, I'm going to go with 1990's Season in the Abyss. For my number 2, I'm going to go with 1988's South of Heaven, and I was just talking about how this album features slower tempoed material, and I think it's really cool that following the metal essential, the total thrash metal classic that is Rain and Blood, which I'm sure if you haven't realized yet, is going to be my number 1 here on the list, but it's a total thrash metal essential, and Slayer knew that it was going to be hard to follow it up by doing the same thing. So what they did here was slow down the tempo and create songs that are slower but still equally heavy, which is fantastic here and definitely shows growth in their sound, with some great tracks on this album, such as the title track South of Heaven, which features just some great riffing as well as some awesome lyrics on here. Silent Scream is great. Behind the Crooked Cross, let's see, Ghosts of War, Read Between the Lies, Spill the Blood, Dissident Aggressor, just great material on here from beginning to end. It's a stacked album, and you can see the band on the back here just firing on all cylinders at this point. It's classic Slayer, and it's my number 2 on the list. From 1988, I'm going to go with South of Heaven. And finally, coming in at number 1, in my opinion, the best Slayer album of all time, surprise, surprise, is Rain in Blood here from 1986. An incredible album from beginning to end, and, there's not much I could say about this album that hasn't been said already, It's a total thrash metal essential, a metal classic, and one of the most influential albums in the thrash metal genre that helped to define thrash metal. Just great stuff from beginning to end here that features some of Slayer's best-known material, such as Raining Blood and Angel of Death, but in addition to those two great tracks, there's also some fantastic tracks on here that are lesser known, like Piece by Piece, Altar of Sacrifice, Criminally Insane, Reborn, Epidemic as well. Really, from beginning to end, this album delivers here. Again, you can see the band on the back. This was probably their best-known record, I'd say, and just filled with incredible material from beginning to end. My number 1 on the list, my personal favorite Slayer album of all time, and I'm sure a lot of people will agree with me in that sentiment. Coming in at number 1 here, I'm going to go with the absolute essential classic thrash metal release that is Rain in Blood. Now it's time to read off the results of the subscriber poll in the community tab. I asked you guys, who is your favorite band of the big 4 of thrash metal? 15% said Slayer, 40% said Metallica, 44% said Megadeth, and 0% said Anthrax. Poor Anthrax, man. But Megadeth right now is winning with 44%. So next week on the channel, when I do another ranking of the studio albums, I'll be focusing on the catalog of Megadeth. So turn on notifications so you don't miss it. I can't wait for that one. But the poll is still open in the community tab. So if you have not voted yet, please go ahead and do so. And poor Anthrax, man. So that wraps up Rank in Blood, my countdown of the Slayer studio albums from worst to best, which should be visible right over here. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications to be notified of a new upload, and let me know down in the comments below, what is your favorite Slayer album of all time? I'd be very interested in hearing your opinions, so let me know all that good stuff down in the comments. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.